Epic. That's the only way I can describe this movie. Epic. I loved this movie. It is not without its flaws, don't get me wrong, but I enjoyed the hell out of this movie. It's really hard for me to describe how this movie works, but it just works. From the comedy, to the performances, to the downright badass action scenes, this movie just works. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me start by describing this movie, for those of you who don't know what this is about. You have this kid who's in high school, who one day has this epiphany and just says, I wonder why no one in real life tries to be a superhero. Of course, the majority of his friends just say, well, no one would do it because they'd get their ass whooped. But this kid ends up being dead serious about it. He goes online and orders this scuba suit, of all things, that he thinks looks cool, throws it on, and then goes out and starts fighting crime. Unfortunately, he gets his ass kicked. Even though he's not really doing much good for the whole of society, he still goes out and does this because it's an addiction for him. This is what gets him through the day. And eventually, he does start doing good for society. He's still getting his ass beat every so often, but he is still going out and helping people. As the movie progresses, more and more people start following his example and going out and fighting crime. However, as the movie shows, their tactics are a bit more brutal than his. First, let me get back to what I was saying before. Nearly every element of this movie worked great. You can tell almost right away that this movie's going for a whole superhero satire feel throughout the majority of the movie. And that works pretty well. For the first 2/3 of this movie, you are just cracking up at the majority of these scenes. One of the funniest things in this movie was watching the father-daughter duo of Big Daddy and Hit Girl going around and just beating the shit out of people. These two are so much fun to watch that I almost wish that these guys had like a spin-off or something on television, or they had their own movie, because these two work so well together. It almost makes me want to take back all of the bad things I said about Nicolas Cage when I did my Knowing review. Now, I don't take them back, but it makes me want to take them back. Him and Chloe Moretz, the girl who plays Hit Girl, work so well together, and they balance each other so well with the comedy they're throwing back and forth, that you just laugh every time they're on screen. And this girl, Chloe Moretz, she has got a future in Hollywood. She is so damn good in this movie, and I would be shocked if we don't see more of her in the future. Now, I did mention that not every aspect of this movie was good. For the first 2/3 of Kick-Ass, you almost feel as though the movie is a satire, as if a lot of these action scenes and really gory shots are really just supposed to be comical. And for the most part, they are. You're just laughing and having a good time with the movie. However, in the last third of the movie, for about the last 30 minutes, it starts to get really dark. Now, initially, I didn't know where this came from. I later found out that this was going back to the original themes and styles of what the comic book had in mind. The comic book was all about being extremely violent and extremely brutal, and not really being a satire. So it makes me wonder, was this movie just trying to be ultra-violent the whole time and not be comical? Or was the movie trying to be comical the whole time and not really be serious and ultra-violent? I think the movie can be both, but I didn't like the extremely dark and strange turn it took in the end. And another small gripe I have is that this movie just ends. There's a decent conclusion, but it leaves a lot for the future, almost as though they're trying to set up a sequel. Now, from what I've been told, there is no sequel to the comic book of Kick-Ass. The writer, Mark Millar, has plans to write another, but he hasn't written one yet. And one last thing I'll mention before I give my rating is that the character of Kick-Ass doesn't seem that dynamic. Now, don't get me wrong, the kid who plays Kick-Ass, Aaron Johnson, did a very good job. But every other performance in this movie is so good that they almost overshadow the main character. There were points in this movie where I didn't want to see Kick-Ass anymore. I wanted them to go back to the story of Hit Girl and Big Daddy, because, frankly, that story was more compelling than the story of Kick-Ass. However, in the grand scheme of things, this movie was still so much fun. So, final rating. I've been holding back the urge to say this, and I know this is going to be said by a lot of people, but yes, Kick-Ass was Kick-Ass. There, I said it, so sue me. The action in this movie was incredible, the performances were very good and extremely funny, and it more than fulfills your bloodlust. That's something I want to warn you about. If some of you are squeamish, do not see this movie, because there is a good portion of blood thrown throughout this entire movie. It is not for the weak of heart. But if you can get through that, you're going to have a great time. I'm going to give Kick-Ass 4 stars. This is as good a movie as I've seen so far this year. And if you get the chance, I would highly recommend you see this movie in theaters. And let me finish this review by saying that I am shocked at all of the negative press this movie has gotten. Well, I shouldn't say negative press, I should just say negative reviews. From what I can tell, this movie has gotten either one of two reactions. 1, people love it, or 2, people despise it. And there's hardly anything in between. One of the most shocking reviews I heard about was that Roger Ebert panned this movie. What was his reasoning for hating this movie? That it was too violent. Too violent? In an era where we have movies like District 9 and Inglourious Bastards, where you have guys' heads getting blown apart and swastikas carved into men's heads, this is too violent? And apparently, another problem that's going around is that people think this movie is going to be marketed towards kids, simply because there is an 11-year-old superhero in there. I have 2 really big problems with this. First, it seems to me that having a rated R movie marketed towards kids has occurred before, and no one had a problem with it before. There was a movie that came out a couple of decades ago by the name of RoboCop. That movie was really marketed towards kids, and it was extremely violent. However, it seems to me not many people pointed out the flaws of that movie and seemed to be pissed off with RoboCop. Second, if you are a parent and you have a problem with this movie and you don't want your kids seeing this movie, don't take them to see it. The movie is rated R for a reason. In fact, if you have children, I would suggest that you do not take them to this movie, because they will not be prepared to see all of the bloodletting that goes on in here. If you have a problem with the violence, fine. No one is forcing you or your kid to see the movie. Leave the movie to us, and we will love the hell out of it. Take care.